In this module, we'll be talking about working with reference art and how to take it into 3D Studio Max and set it up to model from. First, I want to talk about what good reference art is and bad reference art. When it comes to reference art, it's like a blueprint. We need a couple of different views on our objects, and we like to start off with good orthographic views. So we don't want to have anything like this particular view of this vehicle right here, where it's in a perspective view. As you can see, the vehicle heads off into a perspective, point of perspective towards the back, which you should have learned about in your drawing classes. Okay, instead what we prefer to have is something like this. This is an orthographic view. That means it's straight on, it's flat, facing along with the view of the vehicle which we want to model, and we want to have multiple views of these. Now, the idea is to grab as many different photographs as possible. If you've got something like this where you've only got one shot at getting reference art, I recommend taking a camera and actually going into the field and getting what you actually need. After all, if you're a professional, you should locate probably the original object. If I was going to model this car, I would locate it, or at least something very close to it, and go there. It makes for a great field trip, an excuse to get out of the office anyway. And I would take some orthographic views of it. And the idea here is also to grab any close-ups that you might need, and also possibly any textures while you're at it. So going out into the field is very important. That shouldn't be misunderstood. Of course, you can work from images from Google or whatever, or even just drawings, which we'll talk about here in just a little bit. If you have drawings or concept art, that's great too. It's important when you are in the field to remember to get close-ups of different areas for modeling, different details that you might or might not need. For example, if you want to get like the headlight or whatever, the more pictures that you have, after all, this is a digital world we live in, it doesn't hurt to have a few extra safety pictures. So with that said, you want an orthographic view of your objects where it's the front and left and possibly top and side views. Okay, so if you're working with vehicles, you would do something like that. And let's go ahead and open up a vehicle image. Let's see here. I'm going to open up. Let's go to samples. And we're going to look at a Sabre jet here that I got off the internet. Now you can use reference art, like I said. You may find blueprints. I got this one here at a place called Surland. That's SUURLAND.com. They have tons of blueprints of different vehicles that people have drawn. As you can see, this is a great drawing or representation of the vehicle. It has some cutaway drawings of the fuselage, which will come in handy later on, and I'll show you about those. We'll also talk about using the reference art in these different viewports, which are all drawn pretty much to scale. Now when it comes to drawn art, the idea is also to keep pretty much the same distance so that they're of scale. Now if it turns out that you don't have exact scale of your objects, you can of course rescale and resize your images. So and we'll do that a little bit with some of this art here. So since we have a left view, a front view, and a top view, we can use this all for modeling from. Now the idea is we want to split these up into separate images so that we can put them in separate viewports in 3D Studio Max, such as a top view, a front view, and a left view. So what we want to do is cut this image up into multiple viewports. So I'm going to use the select tool here, and I'm just going to draw a marquee around this left view of the vehicle. And one of the things I'm going to try and do is select it right at where the wheels end there. Use that as a basis. Later on that'll come in a little handier. So I'm just going to copy this off and paste it as a new image. So we'll go new, which should automatically size to that image. Now one of the tricks I'm going to show you, you could just arbitrarily go with these different size images. 3D Studio Max can handle different pixel sizes of your reference art. However, I'm going to show you a trick so where you can load them up very simply. in a format to where it's a universal. It makes it a lot quicker and easier to work from. So we're just go ahead and just arbitrarily load this up, and we'll paste this in. So there's our left view. We'll just set that aside for right now, and we'll go ahead and draw another marquee, and we'll deselect what we have, which we did, and we'll select some more art. Oh, deselect, and I'll go ahead and select this portion right here. Copy that, and we'll do another new image, paste that in. Now since this is a large image, this is the one we're going to work from. Go ahead and paste that. And then we'll make a couple more here, one with just the fuselage. Now the fuselage we're going to clean up also, and I'm going to complete that image out. Believe it or not, the whole drawing of the airplane is there, even though you think, oh, it's cut off. Actually, it's not, because we have the left side here to work from, and I'll show you how to fix that. So we'll go ahead and go back to our other image and deselect, and draw a selection around the front view. Copy that, and create a new image. As you can see, again, these are all different sized images, so I'm just going to hit paste, and we'll work with that. Okay, now starting with this top viewport here, one of the things you can do, of course, is clean up your art. We can do this by using a white color and our paintbrush, and just paint out all the unnecessary things that we don't want to have in our viewports. Now, believe it or not, there's a lot of information carried in this blueprint of this vehicle. We'll talk about that in just a minute here. You can see where there's letter references. Those we're going to leave in there. So I'm just going to erase all this. And there we go. So we've got a little bit cleaner image for our viewport, so we don't need to look at unnecessary details on our art. Okay, now using this as our first initial image, we're going to go ahead and go to our left viewport and make sure that all of our reference art is to the same scale. Now, one of the tricks is that I like to keep my images all to the same size, my planes, so that when I create planes in 3D Studio Max, I can just make them and paste them in there. So we're going to use this since this is the largest one, as I said. I'm going to go to my left viewport, and I'm going to select everything, and I'm going to copy that. That's Control C for a shortcut, and I'll go back to my original art and I'll paste this in. Control V for paste. Now you can see it's actually blocking out the image. One of my little tricks I like to do is over under the layer setting over here in Photoshop, temporarily I'm going to change its settings to multiply. That way it's kind of see-through. Being that it's all just black and white line art, this works great for this process. Now the other thing I'm going to do with this, just to make sure that my scale is appropriate for my vehicle here, is I'm going to go to Image, Rotate Canvas, and I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees clockwise. Oops, undo that. What I actually want to do here is, next what I want to do is I want to rotate by using the transform, and I'm going to rotate probably 90 degrees clockwise. There we go. And what this allows me to do is set up my left view so that it's going the same direction as my top viewport. Now I'm going to use my transform tools again with my scale. So go back to Edit, Transform, Scale, and I'll use my scale tools. Just pull that up so I can see the edge of this, and scale the image so that I can get the nose tip to fit with the image here. And the same thing with the bottom. I'm going to scale that down so that the bottom of the tail of the airplane lines up also right about there. So I can set the appropriate scale. Now once I've done that, I'm going to go back to the image rotate again. I have to hit apply. So go ahead and apply the transform, and we'll go back to the edit, transform, rotate counterclockwise 90 degrees now, and set it back to how it was. And we'll just leave that alone for right now, and we can shut that layer off. Okay, next what we want to do is do the same thing with the front viewport here. We're going to copy this in, so we're going to go over to the front view, select all, and copy. Go back to our top view image and paste it in, and change it to a multiply under the layer settings, and we'll just go ahead and move that into place. And we're checking the width of the fuselage, which, as you can see here, is appropriate. And we can go ahead and set up the wheels pretty much. Actually, we're going to line this one up with the left image, so I'm going to turn that back on. I'm going to line the lower wheels so that they're set up evenly with that. And I'm going to turn that left image back off temporarily, and even turn off the background layer for right now. Okay, so let's show you how to finish off this drawing here. One of the things we have is some redundancies here. We'll go ahead and go to our select tool here, and we'll select from the edge of this right wing over here, over to the edge of the wheel, and we'll choose copy, edit copy, and we'll paste it right back in. And it's sitting right on top of where it initially was, so let's go ahead and flip it under the transforms again, and we can flip horizontally. And then let's just go ahead and move that using our move tool. Move that in over the left wheel. Now this isn't perfect, but it's a way to fill in the gaps of where that nose drawing was, if you really need it. Here we go. Then of course we can use like our cleanup tool. Let's go ahead and merge that layer down now over here. So under merge, I'm going to right click layer 4 and choose merge down. And that will merge it with the view behind it. Okay, now what I can do is I can use my clone stamp tool and just kind of clean up that art by moving it over, choosing Alt, choosing my select area, and then moving over and just kind of paint that in. It's not perfect, but it gives me what I need, and then I can repeat the process by just cloning off the whole half of the image here. So let's go ahead and clean this up first. So I'm going to switch to my paintbrush now and clean up where the top view was. Whoops. Undo that. Repaint over that. There we go. Nice and clean. And then I'll go ahead and use my select tool, and you can see this airplane has actually got a split right in half, so let's just follow that down and draw a marquee all the way over to the edge if you need to, and choose a Control-C for copy. Paste it back in. And with that new layer, let's go ahead and flip it with our transform, flip horizontal. And if you need to, change it to multiply so that you can see it over the background. Whoops. Multiply. And let's go ahead and use our move tool and move it over now and match it up. Now if you want and you can't get it perfect in there or whatever, that's fine. We only need the fill-in area over the wing. So you can go ahead and set that in there. And if you want, you can even use your undo brush and go ahead and erase. Clean that back up. Give you a little bit cleaner image. There we go. So there's our front viewport of our vehicle with full wings, nice and clean, at the same position as our left viewport, and we've got that layer set up. We can go ahead and merge that. Let's see what we have below that. Turn that layer off temporarily. Yeah, so we want to merge this layer back down. So go right click over layer 4 again, merge down. And if you want, you can relabel this layer and call it front layer, or even just save it off at this point. So go ahead and do a file, save as. And we're going to change this to like a bump map or a JPEG. We'll call it F86 front, which I already happen to have one of. And I'll call this 01. And set your JPEG options. I leave mine at maximum. They're small. I'm going to shut that layer off. I'm going to turn layer 2 back on and do the same thing with that. Do a file, save as. JPEG. F86 side 01 in this case. Say OK. Turn that layer back off. Turn on the top layer and save that off. Do a save as. JPEG F86 top 01. Say OK for your JPEG options again. Now last but not least, you can turn on all your layers if you want and save off the PSD file, the Photoshop format, because it will save your layers. Do a save and call it just F86 views. And leave it as PSD format, so later on we can use that if we need to come back with our layers intact. And choose save. And that's how we set it up within Photoshop. Now we can go ahead and go over to 3D Studio Max. Now over here, there's multiple ways we can work with reference art. One of the ways we can work with it is to load it up as a background image within our viewports. Now to do that, you just start with your selected viewport and go up to the word Views and go to Viewport Background. The shortcut key, as you can see here, is Alt-B. And up will pop a dialog screen, and you can choose the background source from the file dialog, and you'll navigate to where your files are located. So I'm going to just navigate to where I just saved those files off. And see where our images are here. Here we go. Start with a F86 top 01, which we just saved. And one of the things you'll notice about when this background image dialog is down here at the bottom of it, it gives you a little thumbnail, of course, and most importantly is under the statistics, it tells you about the image file frame size, 570 by 560. I'll show you how you can use that information to set up accurate proportionate images in here also. That's why we saved them all off under the same file size format. So we're going to use that to our advantage. But for now, just in the background image, we're just going to choose Open. And one of the things you want to do is set the aspect ratio so you don't have distorted images. We want to choose Match Bitmap. And we also want to check Lock, Zoom, and Pan. And then you can choose OK. And you get your image showing up in your background viewport. And we can zoom in and out here. And we can model from that. Same thing over under the front viewport. I'll right click over onto that. Go to Views. Viewport Background. Go to Files. And it should remain in that last folder. Or you can go to your History and it should jump right to that, and I'll choose F86 front 01 and then choose open, match bitmap again, lock zoom and pan, and choose OK. And there's my image for that. And I'll do the same thing for my left viewport. Viewport background, files, go to my history, and it should be the first one down. And we'll choose side 01. Open, match bitmap under aspect ratio, lock zoom and pan, and OK. And then last but not least, I'm going to hit my Zoom Extents All button so that my views are all centered up. And then from here, this is where working with your Zoom Extents All button comes in handy. So there's our vehicles all set up with our maps all ready to go. We can model from this. It's proportionate and it's already set up. Okay, this concludes how to use the viewport backgrounds. Instead though, however, I'm just going to do a file reset here. Instead, what I prefer to do is use image planes, and I'll show you how you can do that to work in a two-dimensional space using Direct3D as the driver, which is more accurate actually. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to actually use those same images in a different way. Like I said, we're going to create some planes. So I'm going to create in the front viewport just a basic square plane, which is a two-dimensional polygon. And let's change up its segments over here under the right-hand panel, under the parameters to 1 by 1. And we'll go ahead and zoom around that in all four viewports so you can see it. And we're going to turn our front viewport into a solid view just like our perspective here. So go to front and right click over the word front and choose smoothen highlights from the dialog that pops up. Okay, next what we want to do is we want to go up on the main toolbar. You'll see four spheres, colored balls I guess, and it's called the material editor. And you can also hit M on your keyboard to bring it up. And now the way this works here, you'll have a whole lecture series on the material editor and how to work with textures. But what we're going to do is basically set up a simple texture map to use as a plane within our front viewport to model from. This will allow us to work in perspective in 3 dimensions and still see our image over here under the perspective viewport. Just to show you how this works, I'll go back to the Photoshop and just quite simply show you how this works. How we work with planes, and we can model from them in 2.5D, I guess you could call it, because you can see both viewports in the perspective view. Okay, so back in the material editor over here, these spheres that you see in the material editor are called swatches. Now the idea is that just like a painter has a swatch full of colors that he custom mixes up, he's also got a library that he keeps off to the side of his basic colors. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the first swatch here, and under the shader properties over here, we've got different colors that we can set. Just to show you how this works, I'll click on one of them. I get a color shader that comes up, and I can change it up, and the shader turns slightly blue to white with a fall off. Now under the diffuse color panel here where it says none, there's a little gray box. I can click on that, and as a redundancy I can also go to the maps rollout down here. I can click on that and I can see the diffuse color channel as it's called, and right either place I can go to diffuse color map, or I can go back to the shortcut under the diffuse color. Right next to it's a little shortcut button, and within there we've got different types of maps that we can use. And again, you will have a whole lecture series on the different types of maps you'll be working with, but the one you want to start off with right now is called the bitmap. So go ahead and highlight that and double click on it, or choose OK. and then navigate to where you have your images saved off. In this case, mine's in a folder called F86 Saberjet, and I'll click on my F86 Front 01 JPEG image, and I'll choose Open. Now, one of the things I want to do when I do that, let me go back under the bitmap parameters, which it puts us in right now. Go back to that. Is I want to pay attention to that pixel size of that frame size. Remember, I was talking about that earlier. What I can use this for is setting up the actual size of my plane. So over here under the length and width, I can change that to 570 by 560 for its width. And I hit my zoom extents all again, and it centers up. And then all I have to do is simply drag that material, that swatch, into the front viewport or the perspective viewport onto the solid surface. And then turn on the Show Map and Viewport button. I want to click over under the material editor. There's looks like a blue and white 3D Rubik's Cube. This will allow us to see it in our viewport. So go ahead and click on that, and you should now see your image in your front viewport. Now we'll repeat the process for our left viewport, and this is very easy. Just move the material editor off to the side, and I'll just set it right there and use my rotate tool. And in the top viewport now, I still have that same plane selected. I'm going to hold down my Shift key and click on the top viewport, and rotate 90 degrees, a clone of that same plane. And I can go ahead and reset that. There's a lag in the recording process when I do this, so I'm just going to set that up. And as you can see, on one side it's transparent, on the other side it should have, in the perspective view, it should have solid surface. So right now, as you can see, I've got it set up, and I'm going to move it off to the back. So I'll just close my material editor and use my Move tool now. In the top viewport, I'm going to move it so that these two planes line up with one another. So I'll just set that off onto the left-hand side and in front of the front plane. Now back in my material editor, which again is the 4 spheres up under the main toolbar, and I'll click on the next swatch, and I'll click on the diffuse shortcut for the maps, choose bitmap, and I'll choose side 01 as my JPEG, and I'll just move that off to the side, and I'll simply drag that onto my solid surface in my perspective viewport. And to turn it on, I have to turn on the Show Map and Viewport button. Again, that's the 3D blue Rubik's Cube in the material editor. I click on that, and I should be able to see my image in there. Now, last but not least, we can close the material editor for right now. In my left viewport, I'm going to right-click over the word left, and I'm going to change it to Smooth and Highlights. And we're going to actually change this to a right viewport now, and choose right-click, View, change it to right, and you should see your image, and choose your Zoom Extents All one more time. There is your images in their planes. Everything is in perspective. You can go ahead and adjust them as you need to. But from there we can go ahead and model. We can go ahead and copy that off one more time for the top viewport also. Just take that same plane in the right viewport here and hold down Shift. Rotate that image plane. Make a copy of it, and I'll set it up so that you can see it here. Let me just undo that. There we go. watching in the perspective view, 90 degrees, like that. And then I'm just going to move that in now, in between those two other planes, in the top. And then last but not least, in the perspective view, I'm going to move it down. I'll go back to my material editor one more time and choose the third swatch, choose the diffuse map shortcut, and in the map browser that comes up, choose bitmap and choose F86 top 01 and drag this in my perspective view onto that plane. And then to turn it on, I click on my show map in viewport in the material editor. I can close the material editor off one more time, and in the top viewport, let's turn on smooth and highlights and choose our zoom extents all. There we go. So right now we're set up for modeling. We can go ahead and box model this particular object, and we're all set up. Typically I will save my scene off and call it start. So I would do a file save as, and do a F86 Saberjet start, I'll call it. And I can model from here. Now if you don't want your grids on, you just simply hit G on your keyboard for each viewport, and it will clear those out. And that concludes this lesson.